Sarah Martinez had always been different from other women in her small coastal town of Monterey Bay. At 28, she carried herself with a quiet confidence that some mistook for arrogance, and others found mysteriously attractive. Her lean frame and weathered hands told stories she never shared, and her dark eyes held secrets that made people wonder about her past. The trouble started on a humid Tuesday evening at Murphy's Pub, the kind of place where locals gathered after long days to complain about work, weather, and everything in between. Sarah sat alone at the bar, nursing a beer and watching the news coverage of military operations overseas. Her jaw tightened as she listened to the commentary, her fingers unconsciously drumming against the wooden surface. Behind her, a group of construction workers had been drinking since 5 o'clock, their voices growing louder and more obnoxious with each round. Tommy Rodriguez, a stocky man with calloused hands and an attitude to match, held court among his buddies, regaling them with stories that grew more impressive with each telling. "I'm telling you guys, these so-called female soldiers are just for show," Tommy declared, his words slurring slightly. "Put them in real combat, and they'd crack faster than an egg. All this equality nonsense is just politics ruining our military." His friends nodded along, some laughing, others adding their own crude comments. Sarah's grip tightened on her beer bottle, but she remained silent, her gaze fixed on the television screen where images of soldiers in desert camouflage filled the frame. Tommy's voice carried across the bar as he continued his rant. "I mean, come on. You think some little girl can handle what our boys go through? The real dangerous stuff? Special ops? Give me a break. They're probably just sitting behind desks, typing reports while real men do the fighting." The bartender, Mike O'Sullivan, a grizzled veteran himself, shot glances between Tommy's group and Sarah. He knew enough about reading people to sense the tension building, and something about Sarah's posture made him nervous. She sat perfectly still, but there was a coiled energy about her that reminded him of soldiers he'd known who had seen real action. "You know what really gets me?" Tommy went on, emboldened by his audience. "These military women come back acting all tough, like they're heroes or something. But, deep down, you know they were probably just doing paperwork in some safe zone, pretending to be soldiers." Sarah's reflection in the mirror behind the bar showed a face carved from stone, but her eyes burned with an intensity that would have warned anyone paying attention. She took a slow sip of her beer, set it down with deliberate precision, and, finally, turned around to face Tommy's group. "Is that so?" she said quietly, her voice cutting through the barroom noise with surprising clarity. Tommy looked up, noticing her for the first time. A slow grin spread across his face as he took in her appearance. Average height, slim build, wearing simple jeans and a faded black t-shirt. To him, she looked like exactly the kind of person he'd been describing. Well, he said, nudging his friend Rick with his elbow. "Looks like we got ourselves a feminist here, boys. You got something to say, sweetheart?" Sarah stood up slowly, her movements fluid and controlled. She walked over to their table with the kind of measured pace that spoke of discipline and training. The bar seemed to grow quieter, as if other patrons sensed something significant was about to happen. "I heard what you said about female soldiers," Sarah said, her voice steady and calm. "About how they can't handle real combat. How they're just for show." Tommy leaned back in his chair, his grin widening. "That's right, honey. Just stating facts. No offense, but biology is biology. Men are stronger, tougher, better built for war. It's just how God made us." "So you don't think women can serve in elite units?" Sarah asked, tilting her head slightly. "Special operations? The really dangerous assignments you mentioned?" "Hell no." Tommy laughed, and his friends joined in. "You think some girl could make it through Navy SEAL training? Or become a Green Beret? That's man's work, requiring man's strength. These military women nowadays, they probably couldn't even carry a real soldier's pack, let alone handle actual combat." Sarah nodded thoughtfully, as if considering his words. "Interesting perspective," she said. "So you're absolutely certain no woman could ever qualify for those kinds of units? The elite ones?" Tommy stood up, his chest puffed out with alcohol-fueled confidence. "Lady, I guarantee it. Show me one woman who's actually been through real special forces training, and I'll eat my boots. It's impossible. Physically impossible." The bar had gone almost completely silent now. Even the television seemed muted compared to the tension in the room. Mike the bartender had stopped washing glasses and was watching the scene unfold with growing concern. Sarah's expression remained perfectly neutral as she looked Tommy up and down. "You seem pretty confident about that," she said. "Willing to bet on it?" "Bet on what?" Tommy asked, his voice getting louder. That women can't hack it in special ops? Hell yes, I'll bet on that. It's not even a bet, it's a sure thing. So if I could prove you wrong, Sarah said slowly, if I could show you that a woman not only made it through elite military training but excelled at it, you'd admit you were mistaken? Tommy burst out laughing, slapping his knee. Oh, this is rich. What are you gonna do? Show me some movie clip. Some Hollywood nonsense? Real life ain't the movies, sweetheart. Sarah's lips curved into the slightest hint of a smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. No movies, she said. Real proof. Official proof. Like what? Tommy challenged, stepping closer to her. You gonna tell me you're some kind of secret agent or something? Come on. The silence in the bar was deafening now. Sarah looked around the room, taking in the faces of everyone watching. Some looked amused, others uncomfortable, but all were riveted by the confrontation unfolding before them. You really want proof? Sarah asked, her voice dropping to almost a whisper. You're absolutely sure you want me to prove that everything you just said is wrong? Tommy's face was red with alcohol and excitement. Lady, I'm begging you to try. Show me whatever fake proof you think you got. This ought to be good for a laugh. Sarah stared at him for a long moment, her dark eyes searching his face. Something flickered across her features, a shadow of memory, perhaps, or the weight of decisions made long ago in places far from this comfortable bar. All right, she said finally. You asked for it. She reached slowly toward her neck, where a thin chain disappeared beneath her t-shirt. The movement was deliberate, almost ceremonial, and somehow the simple action commanded the attention of everyone in the room. Tommy's laughter died in his throat as he watched her fingers close around something hanging from the chain. There was something about her posture, about the way she carried herself in that moment, that made him suddenly uncertain. You sure about this? Sarah asked one more time, her hand pausing at her collar. Because once I show you, there's no taking back what you said. No pretending you didn't challenge a woman to prove her worth. Tommy swallowed hard, but his pride wouldn't let him back down now. Yeah, he said, though his voice was quieter than before. Yeah, I'm sure. Show me your proof. Sarah nodded once, a sharp, decisive movement. Then, with deliberate slowness that made every second stretch like an hour, she began to pull the chain from beneath her shirt. The room held its collective breath, suspended in the moment between doubt and revelation, between assumption and truth. Whatever was about to be revealed would change everything, and, somehow, everyone in Murphy's pub knew it. Tommy's eyes were fixed on Sarah's hand as it emerged from her collar, bringing with it something that caught the bar's dim lights and seemed to pulse with significance. His confident smirk was beginning to falter, replaced by something that looked suspiciously like worry. The chain continued to emerge, link by link, carrying with it the weight of secrets about to be unveiled, and a woman's past that was nothing like what anyone in that bar had imagined. In the silence, the only sound was the soft clink of metal against metal as Sarah's proof prepared to shock everyone who had ever doubted what a woman could achieve. The metallic object that emerged from beneath Sarah's shirt gleamed under the bar's fluorescent lights, and the effect was immediate and profound. Tommy Rodriguez's face went from flushed red to pale white in the space of a heartbeat. His mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air, but no words came out. Hanging from the simple silver chain was a trident, not just any trident, but the distinctive Navy SEAL insignia, polished to a mirror shine and worn with the kind of reverence reserved for sacred objects. The three-pronged spear, eagle, anchor, and flintlock pistol were etched with precision, and even in the dim bar lighting, everyone could see the small details that marked it as authentic military hardware. Jesus Christ, whispered Rick, one of Tommy's drinking buddies, his own beer forgotten as he stared at the insignia. Is that a Navy SEAL trident? Sarah said simply, her voice carrying a quiet authority that cut through the stunned silence. Earned through 26 weeks of basic underwater demolition/SEAL training at Naval Amphibious Base Coronado. Hell Week, Dive Phase, Land Warfare Phase, the whole program. Tommy stumbled backward, bumping into his chair and nearly falling over. His eyes were locked on the insignia as if it were a poisonous snake. That's not possible, he stammered. Women can't, the SEALs don't. Didn't, Sarah corrected. Past tense. The policy changed, and a few of us made it through the pipeline before the program was restructured again. Not many, but enough. She lifted the trident slightly, letting it catch the light. This says otherwise to everything you just claimed about women in combat. Mike O'Sullivan, The bartender leaned forward across the bar, his own military experience helping him recognize the significance of what he was seeing. Petty Officer Martinez? He asked quietly, reading the name engraved on the back of the insignia. Special Warfare Operator? Sarah turned to him with a nod. Former Special Warfare Operator First Class Sarah Martinez, Naval Special Warfare Development Group. 8 years active duty, 3 combat deployments. She looked back at Tommy, whose face had gone from pale to green. Still think women can't handle real combat, Mr. Rodriguez? The silence in Murphy's pub was absolute. Every person in the bar was staring either at Sarah or at the trident hanging from her neck. The television continued its news coverage, but the sound seemed muted compared to the weight of the moment. Tommy's friend Jake found his voice first. Holy shit, man, he breathed. She's legit. That's a real SEAL trident. DevGru, Mike said softly, recognizing the significance of Sarah's unit designation. SEAL Team 6. The elite of the elite. He looked at Tommy with a mixture of pity and disgust. You just challenged one of the most highly trained special operations soldiers in the world. Sarah's expression remained neutral, but there was steel in her voice when she spoke again. Let me tell you about those desk jobs you mentioned, Tommy. My first deployment was to Afghanistan, where my team conducted direct action raids against high-value targets. My second was to Syria, where we performed counterterrorism operations behind enemy lines. My third was classified, but let's just say it involved some very dangerous people in some very dangerous places. Tommy's legs seemed to give out, and he collapsed into his chair, his head in his hands. I didn't know. Of course you didn't know, Sarah said, her voice sharp now. Because you made assumptions. You looked at me and saw what you expected to see. Just another woman who couldn't possibly measure up to your standards of what a real soldier looks like. She began walking slowly around their table, her movement predatory and controlled. You want to know about carrying heavy packs? I've humped 120-pound rucksacks through mountains in Afghanistan for days at a time. You want to know about strength? I've carried wounded teammates to safety under enemy fire. You want to know about mental toughness? I've made life-or-death decisions in firefights that lasted for hours. Rick pushed his chair back from the table, as if trying to distance himself from the conversation. Look, lady, ma'am, we didn't mean anything personal, didn't you? Sarah stopped walking and fixed him with a stare that made him squirm. You were sitting here in your safe little bar, drinking your beers, and talking about how women aren't tough enough for real military work. Making jokes about female soldiers while real women are overseas right now, doing the job you're too scared to even attempt. She pulled out her phone and showed them the screen, which displayed a photo of her in full combat gear, face painted with camouflage, holding an assault rifle in what was clearly a hostile environment. Sand and rocky terrain stretched out behind her, and the serious expressions on the faces of her male teammates showed this was no training exercise. This was taken during Operation Neptune's Garden, Sarah said, zooming in on the image. A direct action raid on a terrorist compound in eastern Syria. That's me, second from the left, carrying the same gear as every other operator on my team. We were inserted by helicopter at 0200 hours, conducted a successful raid that eliminated 3 high-value targets, and extracted with intelligence that prevented a major terrorist attack on U.S. soil. Tommy looked up from his hands, his eyes red and watery. Why didn't you say anything before? When we were talking? Sarah slipped her phone back into her pocket and tucked the trident back under her shirt, though everyone in the bar would remember seeing it for the rest of their lives. Because I wanted to see how far you'd go. How comfortable you were making assumptions about people you knew nothing about. How easy it was for you to dismiss the service and sacrifice of women you've never met. She sat down at their table uninvited, her posture relaxed, but her eyes still intense. You want to know the truth about women in special operations? The truth is that it's hard. Harder than anything you can imagine. The physical standards are the same for everyone, male or female. The mental pressure is the same. The training is designed to break people, and most people do break, regardless of gender. Jake nodded nervously. So how many women made it through? In my class. Sarah considered the question. Started with 47 candidates total. 4 were women. By the end of Hell Week, we had 12 candidates left. 2 were women. By graduation, 6 candidates remained. 1 was a woman. She pointed to herself. Me. What happened to the other woman? Rick asked quietly. Sophia Chun, Sarah said, her voice softening slightly. She made it all the way to the final land warfare phase. Broke her leg during a live-fire exercise when her rappelling rope snapped. Medical discharge. She was tough as nails and would have made an outstanding operator. The bar remained quiet, but it was a different kind of silence now, respectful rather than stunned. Other patrons had begun to drift closer, drawn by the gravity of Sarah's story and the presence of someone who had lived a life so far beyond their own experience. Mike wiped down a glass with unusual care before speaking. "Miss Martinez, ma'am, your first round is on the house tonight. Hell, your first 10 rounds are on the house." Sarah smiled genuinely for the first time since the confrontation began. "I appreciate that, Mike. But I'm not looking for special treatment. I just wanted these gentlemen to understand that their assumptions about women in the military were wrong." She turned back to Tommy, who was staring at the table as if it held the answers to the universe. "Tommy, look at me." He raised his head reluctantly. "I'm not telling you this to humiliate you," Sarah said, her voice gentler now. "I'm telling you because those attitudes you expressed, they hurt people. They hurt women who are serving right now, and they hurt the families of women who have died in service to this country." Tommy's voice was barely above a whisper. I had a cousin who served in Iraq. Jessica, Army medic. She died when her convoy hit an IED. He wiped his nose with the back of his hand. I guess I never thought." "Jessica Rodriguez," Sarah said immediately. 22nd Combat Support Hospital, Baghdad. Purple Heart recipient. She saved 17 soldiers' lives before that IED took hers. Tommy's head snapped up, his eyes wide with shock. "You knew Jessica?" Sarah nodded slowly. "Our paths crossed during a joint operation in 2019. Your cousin was one of the bravest medics I ever worked with. She ran into enemy fire to treat wounded soldiers when the rest of us were still taking cover. The Jessica I knew would be pretty disappointed to hear you talking about women the way you were tonight." Tears began streaming down Tommy's face, and he made no effort to hide them. "God, what kind of man am I? Jessica always said I should be proud of military women, and here I am." "Here you are learning something new," Sarah interrupted. "That's what matters now, what you do with this knowledge." She stood up and extended her hand to Tommy. "I'm Sarah Martinez, Naval Special Warfare Development Group. Served my country for 8 years and proud of every single day of it." Tommy stood as well, wiping his face before taking her hand in both of his. "Tommy Rodriguez, construction foreman, former idiot, and cousin of a hero I clearly never understood well enough." Their handshake lasted several moments, and when they broke apart, the atmosphere in the entire bar had transformed. What had started as a confrontation between strangers had become something deeper, a moment of education, redemption, and understanding. As news of what had happened began to spread through the bar, Sarah found herself surrounded by people eager to hear more about her experiences, to ask questions about military service, and to express their gratitude for her sacrifices. But she also found herself thinking about all the women still serving, still fighting, still proving every day that courage and strength come in many different forms. Word of what happened at Murphy's pub spread through Monterey Bay like wildfire. By the next morning, everyone seemed to know about the quiet woman who lived in the small apartment above the marine supply store, the one who turned out to be a decorated Navy SEAL. Sarah found herself the center of attention in a way she had never wanted or expected. She was buying groceries at Henderson's Market when Mrs. Chun, an elderly woman who had always nodded politely but never spoken to her before, approached with tears in her eyes. "Excuse me," Mrs. Chun said softly. "Are you the woman from Murphy's?" "The soldier." Sarah paused in examining apples, recognizing the careful way the older woman pronounced soldier with deep respect. "Yes, ma'am. I am. My grandson David is in the Marines," Mrs. Chun continued. "He deployed to Iraq last month. His first time overseas. I worry about him every day." She reached out hesitantly and touched Sarah's arm. "Meeting you, knowing there are people like you watching over our children, it helps." Sarah felt the familiar weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders. "What unit is David with?" 2nd Battalion, 8th Marines. "He's a medic, like his father was in Vietnam." Sarah nodded. "Good unit. Good Marines. Your grandson is in capable hands, Mrs. Chun." As Sarah continued her shopping, she was approached by more townspeople. A young woman named Ashley told her about her sister who was training to become an Air Force pilot. An older man named Frank wanted to share stories about his daughter who served as a military police officer in Germany. Each conversation was meaningful, but they also reminded Sarah why she had chosen to live quietly after leaving the Navy. The fame was uncomfortable, but something else was happening too. That afternoon, she received a phone call that changed everything. "Sarah Martinez?" The voice on the other end was crisp, professional, and familiar in the way that only military communications could be. Speaking. This is Lieutenant Commander Jackson, Naval Personnel Command. Ma'am, we need to talk. Sarah's blood ran cold. She knew that tone, knew what it usually meant. What's this about, Commander? Your situation has come to our attention. The incident at the local establishment. Ma'am, your identity as a former DevGru operator has been compromised in a very public way. Sarah sat down heavily on her couch, staring out the window at the harbor where fishing boats bobbed peacefully in the afternoon sun. I understand that, sir. But I'm retired. Honorably discharged. I thought my obligation to operational security ended with my service. Under normal circumstances, it would have. But we have a situation developing that requires your specific skill set, and your recent public exposure actually presents us with an opportunity. What kind of opportunity? Sarah asked, though she was already dreading the answer. There's a joint task force being formed to address a specific threat. International terrorism, high-value targets, sensitive operations. They need operators with your background and experience. Your public exposure here actually provides perfect cover for why you'd be moving around, making public appearances. Sarah closed her eyes and rubbed her temples. Sir, with all due respect, I left that life behind for a reason. I've done my time. We know, and we're not ordering you back to active duty. This would be civilian contractor status, substantial compensation, and limited engagement. But Sarah, Commander Jackson's voice softened slightly. The threat is real, and it's significant. We need people who've been there, who know how to handle the worst-case scenarios. Before Sarah could respond, there was a knock at her door. She looked through the peephole and saw Tommy Rodriguez standing on her front step, holding what appeared to be a small wrapped gift. Sir, I need to call you back, Sarah said into the phone. 24 hours, Martinez. Think about it. Sarah hung up and opened the door to find Tommy looking nervous and uncertain. Hi, Sarah. I hope you don't mind me coming by. I asked around and found out where you lived. He held up the package. I wanted to give you something. Sarah gestured for him to come in, still processing the phone call she'd just received. What's this about, Tommy? Tommy sat down carefully on the edge of her couch, as if he wasn't sure he belonged there. I went home last night and called my mom. Told her what happened. About what I said. About meeting you. About Jessica. He unwrapped the package, revealing a small wooden box with brass hinges. This was Jessica's. Mom kept it after the funeral, but she said Jessica would want you to have it. Sarah opened the box to find a military medic's pin, polished and mounted on blue velvet, along with a photograph of a young woman in army fatigues standing beside an ambulance. The woman had Tommy's eyes, but a much gentler expression. She always said the most important thing about being a soldier wasn't proving you were tough, Tommy continued. It was proving you could take care of people when everything went to hell. Sarah studied the photograph, remembering the day it was taken. She had been there, in the background, when this picture was snapped during a brief moment of downtime between operations. I remember this day, Sarah said quietly. We had just finished a joint operation, medical evacuation under fire. Jessica saved 2 Marines that day. She was incredible. Tommy's eyes filled with tears again. She wrote home about that mission. Said she worked alongside some Navy people who were the finest soldiers she'd ever met. She mentioned a female operator who inspired her to be better. Sarah looked up sharply. She wrote about me? She didn't use names, but the description fits. Said this woman moved through combat zones like she was born for it, but still took time to check on wounded soldiers and make sure the medics had what they needed. Tommy wiped his eyes. I think she was talking about you. Sarah set the photograph down carefully, feeling the weight of memory and loss. Your cousin was extraordinary, Tommy. In a profession full of heroes, she stood out. That's why I had to come here today, Tommy said. To apologize properly, and to tell you that Jessica always said people like you were the reason she could do her job. She said knowing there were operators out there who had her back made all the difference. The phone rang again, and Sarah saw Commander Jackson's number on the display. She let it go to voicemail. Tommy, can I ask you something? Sarah said. After last night, after learning about Jessica's service, about what women in the military really face, what do you think now? Tommy was quiet for a long moment. I think I've been an ass for a long time. I think I used Jessica's death as an excuse to be angry instead of as a reason to be proud. And I think meeting you showed me that the best way to honor her memory is to support the people still serving, regardless of gender. That's a good start, Sarah said. There's something else, Tommy added. I quit my job this morning. Sarah looked at him in surprise. Why? Because I realized I've been living my life as a hypocrite. talking about how much I respect the military while sitting safe at home, never even considering serving myself. I'm 32 years old, which might be too old for some things, but not for everything. You're thinking of enlisting? Tommy nodded. Navy, if they'll have me. I want to be a medic, like Jessica. I figure it's never too late to start making a real difference instead of just talking about it. Sarah felt something stir inside her, the same feeling she'd had years ago when she first decided to push herself beyond what anyone thought possible. The Navy will be lucky to have you, Tommy. As Tommy prepared to leave, he turned back to her. Sarah, I know this isn't my place to say, but you seem like someone who's still got more to give. I don't know what that means for you, but don't let people like me be the reason you stop serving in whatever way feels right. After he left, Sarah sat alone with Jessica's box and thought about the phone call from Commander Jackson. She thought about her quiet life in Monterey Bay, about the peace she'd found in anonymity. But she also thought about the conversation at Murphy's pub, about the assumptions people made, about the women still serving who face those assumptions every day. The phone rang again. This time, she answered. Commander Jackson, I've been thinking about your offer, Sarah said. And I need to know more about the mission. The real mission, not the sanitized version. It involves a terrorist cell operating in Southeast Asia. They've been targeting female military personnel specifically, trying to make a statement about women in combat roles. We need someone who understands both the operational requirements and the political implications. Sarah closed her eyes and saw Jessica's photograph again, remembered the young medic's dedication to saving lives regardless of danger. She thought about the women still serving, still fighting, still proving themselves every day. When do you need an answer? Preferably tonight. The situation is developing rapidly. Sarah looked around her small apartment, at the life she'd built in the shadows, away from the spotlight and the danger and the constant pressure of life or death decisions. It was a good life, a peaceful life, but suddenly, it felt incomplete. I'll call you back in an hour, she said. As evening approached, Sarah walked down to the harbor where fishing boats were returning with the day's catch. The sun was setting over Monterey Bay, painting the water in shades of gold and red. She thought about all the places her service had taken her, all the things she'd seen and done, all the people she'd helped protect. She also thought about Tommy Rodriguez, who was willing to completely change his life because one conversation had shown him who he really wanted to be. She thought about Mrs. Chin's grandson David, somewhere in Iraq, and about all the other young service members who were putting their lives on the line every day. Most of all, she thought about Jessica Rodriguez, who had run into enemy fire to save wounded soldiers because that's what her training and her heart told her to do. Sarah pulled out her phone and dialed Commander Jackson's number. Martinez here, she said when he answered. I'm in. 3 weeks after accepting Commander Jackson's offer, Sarah found herself in a briefing room at Naval Air Station North Island, surrounded by familiar faces and a few new ones. The Joint Task Force assembled for Operation Silent Thunder was unlike anything she had seen during her active duty years. A carefully selected team of operators from various branches and agencies, each chosen for specific skills and experience. Ladies and gentlemen, began Captain Morrison, a no-nonsense officer with silver hair and command presence that filled the room. What you're about to hear is classified top secret. The threat we're facing represents a new level of sophistication in international terrorism. The lights dimmed as a large screen displayed satellite imagery of a compound in the mountains of Southeast Asia. 6 months ago, intelligence assets identified a terrorist organization calling itself the Iron Serpent. Unlike traditional terrorist groups, they have specifically targeted female military personnel and their families, both active duty and veterans. Sarah felt her stomach tighten as the captain continued. Their leader, known only as the Colonel, is a former military officer whose identity remains classified. What we do know is that he's assembled a network of operatives across multiple countries, and his organization has been responsible for at least 12 targeted assassinations in the past year. The screen showed photographs of women in military uniforms, Army sergeants, Air Force pilots, Marine officers, Navy petty officers, all smiling in their service photos, all now dead. The Iron Serpent's stated goal is to cleanse the military of female contamination and return to what they call traditional warrior culture. They've been using social media and underground networks to recruit disaffected veterans and active military personnel who share their ideology. Sarah recognized the pattern immediately. They're trying to create a movement, she said. Make it seem like their views are more widespread than they actually are. Exactly, Captain Morrison replied. And they've been increasingly successful. Intelligence suggests they're planning something significant, a high-profile attack designed to maximize media coverage and recruitment potential. The briefing continued for 2 hours, covering everything from the organization's structure to their suspected funding sources. By the end, Sarah understood why Commander Jackson had called her back to service. This wasn't just another counterterrorism operation. It was a direct attack on everything she and her fellow female service members represented. During a break, she found herself talking with Master Sergeant Lisa Park, a Special Forces medic who had volunteered for the mission after losing a close friend to one of the Iron Serpent's attacks. "I knew Captain Jennifer Walsh," Lisa said, showing Sarah a photo on her phone. "Helicopter pilot, 3 tours in Afghanistan. They killed her in her own driveway while her kids watched from the window." Sarah studied the photo, feeling the familiar anger that came with senseless loss. How are we supposed to stop something like this? It's not like fighting a conventional enemy. "That's exactly why they picked us," said a voice behind them. They turned to see Chief Warrant Officer Marcus Stone, a Delta Force operator Sarah recognized from previous joint operations. "They want operators who understand what it's like to be targets, who know how these bastards think." Over the following days, the team underwent intensive training for their specific mission. Intelligence had identified the Iron Serpent's main training facility in the remote mountains of Myanmar, where new recruits were being indoctrinated and trained for attacks worldwide. The facility was heavily fortified and located in terrain that would challenge even the most experienced special operations teams. "The plan is complex," explained Major Rodriguez, no relation to Tommy, though the name made Sarah think of him every time she heard it. "We insert via halo jump during the new moon phase, establishing observation posts to gather intelligence on their operations. Once we have a complete picture, we execute simultaneous raids on their training facility and command center." Sarah found herself assigned to Team Alpha, tasked with infiltrating the command center where the colonel was believed to be directing operations. Her teammates included Marcus Stone, Lisa Park, and 2 other operators she hadn't worked with before, Navy SEAL Commander Jake Williams and Army Ranger Staff Sergeant Maria Santos. As they prepared for deployment, Sarah received an unexpected visitor at the base. Tommy Rodriguez appeared at the gate, wearing navy dress blues with the bright gold buttons and crisp white uniform that marked him as a new recruit fresh from basic training. "Sarah," he called out as she walked across the base compound. "I hoped I'd catch you before you left." She barely recognized him. The soft construction worker had been replaced by a lean, confident sailor whose posture and bearing spoke of military discipline and pride. "Tommy, you look like a completely different person." "I feel like one too," he said with a genuine smile. "Finished basic training last week, heading to Field Medical Service School next month. Turns out I'm pretty good at this military thing." They walked together toward the harbor where ships lined the pier like sleeping giants. "I wanted to thank you again," Tommy said, "for that night at Murphy's, for showing me what real strength looks like. My whole life changed because you were brave enough to stand up for what's right." Sarah felt a warmth in her chest that had nothing to do with the San Diego sunshine. "Tommy, you changed your own life. All I did was wear a piece of metal around my neck." "No," he said seriously. "You showed me that courage isn't about being the biggest or the strongest or the loudest. It's about doing what needs to be done, even when it's hard, even when people don't understand." They reached the end of the pier where Sarah's transport ship waited. Sailors moved purposefully across the deck, making final preparations for departure. "I have something for you," Tommy said, reaching into his pocket. He pulled out a small package wrapped in plain brown paper. From the whole construction crew. Even the guys who weren't there that night heard about what happened. Sarah opened the package to find a simple compass, the kind used by hikers and outdoors enthusiasts. Engraved on the back were the words, "For Sarah," always pointing toward courage. "We figured," Tommy said, "that someone like you probably goes to places where having a good compass matters." Sarah held the compass in her palm, feeling its solid weight. "This is perfect, Tommy. Thank you." As her ship prepared to depart, Tommy saluted her with the crisp precision of a sailor who had learned to honor those who served before him. Sarah returned the salute, remembering her own early days in the Navy when everything seemed impossibly difficult, and the standards seemed impossibly high. The next morning, Sarah stood on the ship's deck as they moved through international waters toward their insertion point. The other members of her team were conducting final equipment checks, reviewing mission parameters, and mentally preparing for what lay ahead. Commander Williams joined her at the railing, looking out at the endless expanse of ocean. Nervous? He asked. Always, Sarah replied honestly. The day I stop being nervous before a mission is the day I should stop doing missions. You know, Williams said, when they first told us we'd be working with a female SEAL, some of the guys had concerns. Not about your capabilities, he added quickly, but about team dynamics, about whether it would create complications. Sarah had heard similar concerns before. And now we're grateful you're here. This mission specifically requires someone who understands what it's like to be targeted for being a female service member. You bring perspective we don't have. That evening, as the team conducted their final briefing before insertion, Sarah thought about the path that had led her here. From the confrontation at Murphy's pub to Tommy's transformation to this moment, preparing to fight an enemy that specifically targeted people like her. She touched the compass in her pocket and thought about courage, not the Hollywood version that involved dramatic speeches and impossible heroics, but the real kind that showed up in quiet moments when doing the right thing was difficult and dangerous. Team Alpha, prepare for Halo insertion in T-6 hours, came the announcement over the ship's communication system. Sarah closed her eyes and ran through the mission profile one more time. In 6 hours, she and her team would jump from an aircraft at 30,000 feet, infiltrate enemy territory, and attempt to neutralize a threat that had already claimed too many lives. It was exactly the kind of mission she had trained for, exactly the reason she had become a SEAL in the first place. But this time felt different. This time, it wasn't just about national security or strategic objectives. This time, it was personal. The Iron Serpent had made it personal when they decided that women like her, like Jessica Rodriguez, like all the others who had served with honor and distinction, were somehow less worthy of respect and recognition. They had made it personal when they chose to spread their poison through violence and intimidation. As Sarah prepared her gear for the mission ahead, she thought about all the young women currently serving in the military, facing skepticism and discrimination while doing their jobs with professionalism and courage. She thought about the ones who would serve in the future, who deserved to do so without fear of being targeted for their gender. The mission was about more than eliminating a terrorist threat. It was about defending the principle that service and sacrifice should be honored regardless of gender, that courage and competence were what mattered in determining a warrior's worth. Sarah Martinez had never asked to be a symbol or a representative of anything larger than herself. She had simply wanted to serve her country to the best of her abilities. But sometimes, circumstances required people to stand for something bigger than their individual goals and ambitions. As she settled into her bunk for a few hours of rest before the mission, Sarah fingered the compass Tommy had given her and smiled grimly. Tomorrow, she would point herself toward danger once again, but this time she carried with her the knowledge that her service meant something to people like Tommy, like Mrs. Chun, like Jessica Rodriguez's memory. It was enough to sustain her through whatever lay ahead. The Halo jump at 30,000 feet was textbook perfect. Sarah and her team descended through the darkness like silent shadows, their parachutes opening with whispered efficiency at precisely 2,000 feet above the mountainous terrain of Myanmar. The insertion zone was a narrow valley surrounded by peaks that rose like ancient guardians against the star-filled sky. Team Alpha landed within 50 meters of their planned coordinates, regrouped quickly, and began the 3-hour trek to their target. The Iron Serpent's command center was nestled in a monastery that had been abandoned decades ago, its ancient stone walls now housing sophisticated communication equipment and the terrorist organization's leadership structure. Sarah moved through the jungle terrain with the fluid grace that came from years of training and experience. Behind her, Commander Williams and Staff Sergeant Santos maintained perfect spacing and noise discipline. The only sounds were the natural nighttime chorus of insects and the whisper of wind through the canopy. As they approached the target, Sarah's radio crackled with updates from the other teams. Team Bravo had successfully infiltrated the training facility 5 kilometers to the north, while Team Charlie maintained overwatch positions on the surrounding ridgelines. Everything was proceeding according to plan. Alpha Team, this is Control, came the voice of Captain Morrison from the command ship. Thermal imaging shows approximately 15 individuals inside the target structure. We have positive identification on the colonel in the main communication room. Sarah acknowledged the transmission and signaled her team to hold position while she conducted final reconnaissance. Through her night vision scope, she could see guards patrolling the monastery's perimeter with automatic weapons and professional discipline. These weren't amateur terrorists. They were trained soldiers who had chosen to follow a twisted ideology. The infiltration took 40 minutes of careful movement and precise timing. Sarah's team neutralized 3 perimeter guards with silent efficiency, then made their way through the monastery's ancient corridors toward the command center. The stone walls that had once echoed with prayers now hummed with electronic equipment and the quiet conversations of the Iron Serpent's leadership. As they approached the final doorway, Sarah heard a voice that made her blood run cold. The colonel was speaking in accented English about upcoming operations, detailing plans to target military families in the United States. Phase 3 will commence in 72 hours, the voice said. Simultaneous strikes against the families of 12 female service members. We have confirmed their home addresses and daily routines. The message will be unmistakable. Women who contaminate our military forces will pay the ultimate price. Sarah's jaw tightened as she realized the scope of what they were planning. This wasn't just about ideology. It was about systematically terrorizing women out of military service through fear and violence. Commander Williams positioned himself at the door while Santos prepared flashbang grenades. Sarah checked her weapon one final time and thought about Jessica Rodriguez, about Tommy's transformation, about all the women who were serving right now without knowing they were being hunted. Alpha Team, you are cleared hot, came the authorization from Control. Execute, Sarah whispered into her microphone. The door exploded inward as Santos's flashbangs detonated in sequence, filling the room with blinding light and deafening noise. Sarah was through the doorway before the echoes faded, her weapon tracking left while Williams went right, and Santos covered the center. Nobody move. U.S. Military, she shouted, though the commands were largely unnecessary. The 6 men in the room were temporarily incapacitated by the flashbangs, stumbling blindly and reaching for weapons they couldn't see. Sarah's target was the colonel himself, a tall man in his 50s with military bearing and cold eyes that showed no surprise at being captured. Even blinded and disoriented, he moved with the disciplined reactions of someone who had been in combat before. Colonel Marcus Dalton, formerly United States Army Special Forces, Williams said, reading from intelligence files as he secured the prisoner. Discharged for conduct unbecoming after making public statements about women in combat. Sarah studied the colonel's face as his vision cleared. She recognized the type, someone whose entire identity had been built around a particular view of military culture, who couldn't adapt when that culture evolved beyond his understanding. You're the female SEAL, Dalton said, his voice carrying a mixture of disgust and grudging recognition. The one from the California bar incident. They briefed us about you. They briefed you wrong, Sarah replied steadily. Because I'm not the female SEAL. I'm a SEAL who happens to be female. There's a difference. As the team secured the command center and began collecting intelligence materials, Sarah found herself face-to-face with evidence of the Iron Serpent's true scope. Wall charts showed planned attacks across multiple countries, targeting not just active military women, but also veterans, military wives, and even female military contractors. Among the files was a detailed dossier on Captain Jennifer Walsh, the helicopter pilot Lisa Park had known. The terrorists had tracked her movements for months before the attack, studying her children's school schedules and her husband's work patterns. It was stalking and murder elevated to the level of military operation. Sarah, Santos called from across the room. You need to see this. She joined him at a computer terminal where intelligence data scrolled across multiple screens. They've been monitoring social media and military databases, identifying female service members who have received public recognition or media attention. Sarah's stomach dropped as she saw her own name on one of the lists, along with a photograph taken outside Murphy's pub the night of her confrontation with Tommy. The file included detailed information about her residence in Monterey Bay, her daily routines, and assessments of her threat level to their organization. They were planning to kill you, Williams observed grimly. Probably within the next month, based on these timelines. The colonel spoke from where he sat zip-tied against the wall. You represent everything that's wrong with the modern military. Women playing soldier while real warriors die because of political correctness. Sarah turned to face him, her voice calm and controlled. Real warriors? You mean like the ones who murdered Captain Walsh in front of her children? Like the ones who planned to assassinate women for the crime of serving their country? Those women never should have been in uniform in the first place, Dalton replied. The military exists to fight wars, not to accommodate social engineering experiments. You're right about one thing, Sarah said. The military exists to fight wars. And sometimes that means fighting people like you, domestic terrorists who threaten American service members and their families. As teams Bravo and Charlie reported successful completion of their objectives, Sarah and her team prepared to extract with their prisoners and intelligence materials. The Iron Serpent's leadership was now in custody, their training facilities destroyed, and their operational plans compromised. But, as they waited for helicopter extraction, Sarah reflected on the deeper implications of what they had uncovered. The Iron Serpent had been only one manifestation of attitudes that existed more widely, attitudes that she had encountered firsthand in places like Murphy's Pub. The helicopter arrived precisely on schedule, and as the team loaded their prisoners and evidence, Sarah found herself thinking about Tommy Rodriguez. In choosing to enlist and train as a medic, he had made a decision that directly contradicted everything the colonel and his followers believed about military service and gender roles. During the flight back to the extraction ship, Commander Williams approached her over the helicopter's noise. "Hell of a mission, Martinez. Your first time back in action after retirement." "Hopefully my last," Sarah replied, though she wasn't entirely certain she meant it. "The intelligence we gathered tonight will probably prevent dozens of attacks. You saved a lot of lives by being here." Sarah nodded, watching the mountains of Myanmar fade into darkness below them. That's always been the job. Protecting people who can't protect themselves. 3 weeks later, Sarah stood once again in Murphy's Pub, but this time the atmosphere was completely different. The bar was packed with people from throughout Monterey Bay who had come to celebrate her return and hear about her experiences. Tommy Rodriguez was there, now confident in his Navy uniform and proud to introduce his mentor to his girlfriend and family. "Ladies and gentlemen," Mike O'Sullivan called out, raising his beer. To Sarah Martinez, proof that heroes come in all forms, and that courage isn't about size or gender. It's about standing up for what's right when it matters most. The crowd raised their glasses in a toast that seemed to echo throughout the small coastal town. Sarah accepted their gratitude graciously, but her mind was already turning toward the future. The Iron Serpent had been neutralized, but the attitudes that created organizations like it still existed. Later that evening, as the crowd began to thin, Sarah received a phone call from Commander Jackson. "Martinez, we've got another situation developing. Different theater, different enemy. But we could use someone with your skill set and experience." Sarah looked around the bar at the faces of people who had become friends, at Tommy who had found his purpose, at Mike who treated her like family. This was the peaceful life she had built, the life she had earned through years of service and sacrifice. "Tell me about the mission," she said. Because ultimately, Sarah Martinez understood something that people like Colonel Dalton never would. True strength wasn't about proving superiority over others. It was about using whatever abilities you had been given to protect people who needed protection, to stand up for principles that mattered, and to serve something larger than yourself. Whether that service took place in a bar in Monterey Bay, standing up to ignorance and prejudice, or in the mountains of Myanmar, fighting terrorists who threatened innocent people, the principle remained the same. Some fights were worth fighting, regardless of the personal cost. As Sarah walked home through the quiet streets of her small town, she fingered the compass Tommy had given her and smiled. No matter where her service took her next, she would always know which direction pointed toward courage. And sometimes, that was enough to change the world, one conversation and one mission at a time. The story of the woman who revealed her sealed trident in a small coastal bar had become legend in Monterey Bay, but, more importantly, it had become an inspiration. Not just for women who wanted to serve in the military, but for anyone who had ever been told they weren't good enough, strong enough, or worthy enough to pursue their dreams. Sarah Martinez had proven that heroes don't always look the way people expect them to look. Sometimes they sit quietly at the end of the bar, carrying their achievements with humility and their service with pride, ready to stand up when standing up is what the moment requires. And in a world that often seemed divided by misunderstanding and prejudice, that kind of quiet heroism was exactly what was needed most.